celebration is the Flower of Cities, Jerusalem, Palestine, which comes from the famous song Zahrat al-Madain by the one and only Fairuz. We chose Jerusalem as our theme this year because it is central to the Palestinian fight for liberation, autonomy, and freedom. Jerusalem, which is known as the Old City, houses many ancient churches, temples, and mosques, making it dear to the Muslim, Christian, and Jewish community. While this city is made up of beautiful ancient buildings meaningful to these communities, their beauty has been overwhelmed by colonialism and heavy militarization at the hands of Zionism. Fairuz states in her powerful song on Jerusalem, "Our eyes travel in your direction every day. They wade through the temples, they embrace the ancient churches, and they wipe the sadness off the mosques." Due to everything that has been happening on the ground in Palestine this year, we find it necessary to celebrate Jerusalem and its importance to the Palestinian narrative and identity. Looking at the Palestinians in Gaza, who on March 31st of this year, to this very second, have been participating in the Great March of Return. As well as looking at the Palestinians in the West Bank who have taken the streets, it is important to note that Palestinian people refuse to remain silent in this normalization of constant displacement, erasure, and exile by the racist settler colonial state. As Fairuz states, the gates of our city will not be locked, and with our hands we will return the globe of Jerusalem.
To shift Western perceptions of Palestine and surrounding Arab countries. His dedication to educating the public inspires us as students and as Palestinians alike. He wrote many pieces that have challenged Western discourses, such as his famous books Orientalism and the Question of Palestine. He was chosen to be a central part of this mural for his work and ideas have heavily impacted the academic world, opening the doors to narratives that have often been silenced. Saeed never forgot his Palestinian roots, and through his mural, his legacy lives on.
The Edward Said mural here at SFSU is the only Palestinian mural on a college campus in the entire United States. The mural has hung proudly for the past 11 years after GUPS members at the time and their supporters, including faculty and community members, fought long and hard to get our mural approved. It is important to note that not all the images GUPS was hoping to have on the mural were approved, such as Handala, who is the little boy on our flyer, holding the flower. Handala was drawn by Naji al-Ali, a Palestinian who was displaced at the age of 10 in 1948 by the Zionist forces. He was always drawn in torn-up clothes with his back facing everyone, representing his disappointment in the world for allowing his displacement to occur. Just like Naji al-Ali when he was exiled, Handala is 10 years old and will remain that age until Palestine is liberated and he is able to return home. Another image that GUPS had to sacrifice for the mural's approval was the key, which symbolizes the right of return for Palestinian refugees. This is the reason we attached keys on the centerpieces on your table with the names of cities and villages that have been destroyed by the Zionist state as well. Here you can see the pattern of images that symbolize the Palestinian right of return being erased from the Edward Said mural. Erasure has been a large part of the Zionist agenda in hopes of making us as Palestinians forget who we are and where we come from. This discourse has been largely present in the continuous efforts in establishing Jerusalem as the capital of the colonial state. Unfortunately for them, not only do we understand that Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine, it is the flower of cities, and this flower has proven to have strong, deep roots that refuse to be uprooted from its home.
While not all the images GUPS was hoping to have on our mural are there today, our beautiful Edward Said mural is a testimony to our presence on this campus from the moment the mural was approved to us celebrating it here today. To have a mural on this campus that represents our culture, our struggle, and overall our resilience is a constant reminder to those that ignore our narratives that we do exist, and we will remain connected to our land no matter where exile and diaspora takes us. As the last standing chapter of the General Union of Palestine Students, we stand with our academics, allies, and community members that have been constantly attacked for the work they do around Palestine and elsewhere. We as GUPS understand that we would not be able to celebrate our presence on campus without the support of all those who have stood with us. We would like to quickly congratulate GUPS advisor Dr. Abdul Habi, who unapologetically teaches the realities of Palestine, on having the lawsuit that contained false allegations against her dismissed.
celebration. Shukran.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sabrine,
I'm Daniela.
and we'd like to welcome our panelists on stage.
Usama Kamil. And Emily Renteria.
First, we'd like to interview Osama Kamil. Osama Kamil is an outreach coordinator for the San Francisco Bay Area office of the Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE. In this position, he aims to grow visibility of CARE services and cultivate relationships that advance civil rights and social justice. Osama graduated from the University of California, Irvine, double majoring in international relations and political science, with an emphasis in conflict resolution and post-colonial nationhood.
Usama, after visiting Palestine this past summer, what are key lessons you have taken with you? How have your experiences shaped your understanding of the current struggle for liberation in Palestine? And finally, has there been a common discourse among mosques and Muslim organizations to ignore Palestine as a whole because they don't want to get political? Looking at Jerusalem, particularly after your trip, why is it important for mosques and Muslim organizations to internationally to play a role in resisting the settler colonial state?
Thank you. How y'all doing tonight? It's good to hear. Thank you for inviting me. This is an incredible honor. I'm on the stage with Dr. Rabab Abdul-Hadi, the Dr. Rabab Abdul-Hadi. Give her a shout out, y'all. So I have a piece of paper in my hand because I'm incredibly forgetful, so forgive me. I was invited by Palestinian activists to center Palestine in my work as someone who is involved in the civil rights space, as an artist, and as someone who wants to pursue academia. And I really thought long and hard about what it meant to visit Palestine, to visit an occupied land, and what that meant to be someone who is touring this devastation. Because that reality of going and then leaving, that reality is detaching myself from the violence on the body, on the mind, on the spirit, on the soul, of the people that have to experience that violence on a day-to-day. And so I really have to think about what that meant for me as someone who is going to benefit, right? I'm going to go there, I'm going to see what it's like to see the struggle and what it's like for Palestinians to leave on a day-to-day, and then I'm going to leave, right? I have the privilege of leaving. And I actually felt that in the city of Al-Khalil. I was walking in the marketplace, and there was this old ammo, an old uncle, that I was kind of looking down, and this uncle came in and he just shoulder pressed, just hit me. And I looked up and I was like, what happened? And I saw that he was limping, so I looked back and I said, I'm sorry for bumping into you. And I looked at the two folks that were in front of me, and they looked like they had been hit too. This person was taking up space. And I was thinking to myself, like, it took me a while to really contextualize what was happening, right? What was this uncle doing? And the more that I thought about it, the reality is how many folks had he seen walk the streets of Al-Khalil who came in as social justice activists, as artists, as folks that were seeking liberation for Palestine. They came in, they saw, right, the reality on the ground. They saw what Palestinians were facing, and then they took themselves home. They took themselves home. And then they showed up on a panel and felt like, this is it, I've done enough. And so I'm privileged to have returned and to share my experiences with all of you. And I just have a couple of bullet points in answering your first question. The first one is, one of the things that I learned was that I too am a settler. In the context that it isn't just that my family moved here, right? It isn't that my family moved to Sacramento or that I moved to the Bay Area. No, there was an active settling that I did. And in the process of settling, there's a process of displacement. And now whether I see it or not, and this is visible in Jerusalem specifically, whether I see it or not, whether I see the process of displacing that I'm a part of, has to do with the visibility and invisibility of violence. And we see that specifically in the city of Jerusalem, is when you walk through the city of Jerusalem, you think, is there settler colonialism here? The reality is so normalized that if I was someone who was visiting the city, I would think that there was a kind of occupation that was happening there. And so going back to my parents, while they may have been unconscious of the fact that they were settling, my consciousness of that contradiction, justice on a stolen land is impossible and fallacious, I have to take ownership of what that means. When I speak, when I walk, when I organize, and when I dream or build, and so on and so forth. And what I learned is that how can I begin to center indigenous people's struggles and narratives in my own organizing and in conversations that I have with friends and family. If settler colonialism can be normalized in the way that it has been, then we can also normalize narratives for justice and real narratives that our community experiences. And one of the gut-wrenching feelings as soon as I exited the plane in Tel Aviv, as soon as you enter, you get off the plane, there are these images, these graphics of black and brown children, black and brown folks who look like they are benefiting from the state of Israel. And with signs that say Israel supports the needy, is a hope for all, is a multicultural haven, Israel provides shelter and sanctuary, black and brown people are being fed, right? And they look happy and smiling and so on and so forth. And the reality, however, is staunchly in opposition to that. And as soon as you go to the passport station, there's a large sign that welcomes you into Ben Gurion Airport, and it says, Ben Gurion Airport, it was here from the beginning, and it will be here till the end.
Oh, by the way, Sam, I just want to let you know that 5 minutes left. And each panelist gets 10 minutes to answer the question. No, you're fine. But it was this reinforcement of the colonial narrative that this is a land without people, right? And there's a duality to that, right? There's the duality that this land itself, there were no people here. The people that were here, there were no people here. They weren't considered people. And there's the duality that this was land that these folks could come in and lay claim to. In the city of Khalil, I met a 7-year-old girl whose face was horrifically scarred. Settlers broke bottles on her face. And so when I say it's important for us to have conversations, right, to normalize conversations about indigenous struggles, I mean to say that we can't wait, right? That folks are struggling, generations are losing their lives, and we can't just continue to allow those generations to, that generational pain to continue. The second point, and I'll move on, I learned that settler colonial states and states rooted in colonial white supremacist social, economic, and political philosophies do not respect sanctuary spaces or places of worship. In fact, there's an active and systematic process of violence against them, specifically as they produce a fortitude of the heart that violence can't penetrate. And so what I'm essentially saying is that white supremacists attacking the synagogue is the same as white supremacists attacking Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, or attacking the Masjid Ibrahimi in Al-Khalil. And I know that some of the folks wanted me to talk about my experience on July 27th. It was my first week in Palestine. I'm there for Jummah, I'm there for the Friday prayers. I go into the mosque, and I remember thinking to myself, some of the other folks that were with me on the delegation wanted to pray all the way in the front. And I remember thinking to myself, and I'm trying to dip out early. I'm not going to wait for everybody to pray their prayers and then have to leave. And so I prayed towards the back. I finished my prayer, and then there was the death of someone in the city, and so the community was praying on that person. And then I decided to pray my sort of extra prayers, and in the middle of my extra prayers, there are loud flashbangs, boom, shots fired, right? Folks start leaving next to me, left and right. And I remember thinking to myself, like,
this is really happening. Like, there is really an attack right now. And I had gone into a settler colonial nation thinking that there was no way that violence was going to happen, right? I think that there's incredible privilege in that as someone who expects to be safe all the time, to not go into an active war zone and expect that no violence would be perpetuated on you. But as soon as I left the mosque, people are being shot with rubber bullets. People are being arrested. And one of the things that really shook me was the incredibly nuanced, when we talk about Palestinian liberation and Palestinian resistance, it was incredibly nuanced in that there were children laughing. In the middle of all of this violence, there are young people that are shooting back the fireworks at these soldiers that are coming in and actively hitting folks and beating folks and shooting them. Snipers are taking the roof, right? Uncles are taking off their slippers and throwing it at these decked out soldiers, y'all. And in the midst of that, there are children laughing. And so laughing and joy becomes a form of resistance. In the middle of that, I swear to God, there was an uncle who was maybe in his 80s, walking like there was no care in the world, like he had seen this the Friday before, he had seen this time and time again. This is what it was like for him. This is life in Jerusalem. This is life under a settler colonial state. And I remember being shook, like I'm crying, right? I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, like I've been in protests in Egypt. I've seen the military run vehicles into people. I've been in protests in Sacramento. I've seen the police, get down on folks. And no time in my life had I been so afraid and so out of place and alone, except in that moment. And another crazy incident, I looked around and there are folks making like shawarma plans, like lunch plans, as people are getting shot. Like I'm thinking to myself, this is wild. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And so this process of planning, like we're gonna live and we're gonna make our plans. And your violence on us, they will not affect how we dream and contextualize, right? And assert our capacity and our agency. We will continue to dream, and we will make plans, and we will walk like nothing happens. We will have our dignity and our pride and our joy. We will do all of that. We will express our humanity. And I thought that was incredibly powerful.
Okay. Thank you, Sana, for that. Thank you. Now we have Emily Renteria. Emily Nania Renteria is a border scholar of Yaqui ancestry and a full-time lecturer in the College of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State University. There she teaches across disciplines in the departments of race and resistance and Latino-Latina studies. She currently sits on the board of directors for the American Indian Cultural Center of San Francisco and co-teaches sliding scale self-defense classes for women, trans, and two-spirit people. She attended the recent delegation Teaching Palestine, Pedagogical Praxis and the Indivisibility of Justice, where she presented on land-based pedagogy. Nania is also a professional hula dancer who has toured around the globe.
During your time in Palestine, were you able to see the parallels between the Palestinian struggle and the indigenous people's struggle here? What does the liberation and the right of return mean and look like for these people? And what does international solidarity with both causes mean to you?
Thank you. So I attended the recent delegation to Palestine with Dr. Bob and about 13 others. And since then, I have struggled to make intellectual sense of the things that I saw there. Our delegation was full of very astute scholars, academics, people who do solidarity work, Palestine, all over the globe. And one of the primary barriers that I've bumped up against in myself, as a Yaqui person and displaced indigenous person myself, is what some people would call blood memory. So as indigenous peoples, particularly in Turtle Island, we talk about this thing called blood memory, which says that in our DNA we hold memories of what's happened to our ancestors and generations before. And For some, this means that there's a memory of trauma that has been left behind by things like settler colonialism, by the violence that is required in order to occupy a people for a place. And so in addition to this intergenerational trauma, we also carry a great deal of resilience and resistance to those colonial processes. But you don't really have to visit Palestine to know that our struggles are linked. And so, that really resonated with me what you said about the privilege of being able to leave, to come and go as we please, because one of the key factors of occupation that I saw and that I could draw a parallel with here is the limitations on mobility, right? So just the ways that, checkpoints everywhere, and the wall is, of course, a very ubiquitous example of that as well. Home demolitions, displacements of other kinds, new settlements popping up all the time, land theft, and demographic warfare as well. So all of these things are restrictions on not only individuals but peoples that are designed specifically to not only to limit freedom but to sort of promote a breaking of a spirit of a people. And as we know, in the terms of the Palestinian struggle and indigenous North American struggles, those spirits won't be broken. It's just that the challenges become ever more intense or transform in various ways over time. So I kind of want to echo some of the things that our previous speaker talked about in terms of the ways that settler colonialism is made invisible in the United States, and to kind of do a little bit of comparison between someplace like California or the land where my father is from, in sort of Sonora, Mexico, southern Arizona border, and what I saw in Palestine. So most people, when they think about settler colonialism in the United States, it can seem like an abstract concept because we have this narrative here in the U.S. of we're all immigrants. And those narratives, while they might ring true for certain segments of the population, also diminish and erase indigenous claims to land. So if we're really talking about sovereignty, decolonization, recognizing and respecting indigenous nationhood, then we also have to grapple with the reality of what it means for us to be immigrants or displaced peoples or refugees or settlers as well on someone else's territory. So I found Dr. Abdulhadi's notion of the architecture of occupation that she spoke about a lot while we were on the delegation to be really useful in that regard. Because that architecture is understood in the United States to be mostly settled, and I mean that in a dual sense, right? So it's very unusual to open a gathering like the one that we've had here tonight by acknowledging indigenous nations, right? Particularly when even in participating in cultural spaces that are said to be indigenous-led or inclusive in that way, that there's very little discussion of what does it actually mean to acknowledge that our being is permitted here. By someone else, by people whose existence predates us, and those direct ties to land are sacred and are evidenced in the blood memory that we as indigenous peoples of North America share with folks in Palestine undergoing that active displacement now. So those architectures of occupation, again, rely a great deal on erasure of indigenous peoples. So for us as Native nations to exist in the United States, let alone, as a demographic number at all, period, calls into question the legitimacy of other claims to land, right? So, thank you. So, similarly, right, when you can, traveling throughout Palestine, I was, I don't want to say shocked, but I was noticing the active violence of occupation there. So armed soldiers everywhere, checkpoints, razor wire, the wall, being prepared to have someone ask you for your documents, proving your nationality at all times. And I was also struck by the parallels of how that's going on for our brothers and sisters to the south who are also indigenous. Bills like SB 1070 and so on, that attempt to erase indigeneity through appeals to sort of a racial ideal like being an immigrant or being illegal or being Mexican, right? So these appeals to the settlers' legal logics as legitimating peoples who already have those direct claims, who don't need to provide that sort of evidence. So one of the examples that I often use in my classes, I teach a lot of 110 and 200 level classes, is Standing Rock, right? So Standing Rock is one of the biggest recent indigenous protests in the U.S. In many decades, arguably, perhaps in a century. But that resistance in the Plains Nation specifically is also hundreds of years old, right? So you can look back at the Wounded Knee Massacre, or the Wounded Knee Incident, the 1970s, and then go back to the Wounded Knee Massacre roughly 100 years prior to that. These are both frontal assaults on indigenous nations, exercising their inherent sovereignty on their sovereign territories, treaty lands, but who are under fire, literally, from the FBI and the U.S. Army, respectively. So what could cause something like that to snowball and to become a pan-indigenous movement that's not only pertinent to the people of Standing Rock, but that's also sees international solidarity efforts from around the globe, including Palestinians as well as Native nations from all over the Americas, not just the U.S., is this thing called blood memory. Is this understanding that's so common if you hang out with Native folks at all, that we know that struggle. We know that disrespect of the land. We know that sovereignty, that inherent sovereignty not being honored. We know that the pain of displacement, of trauma, of having the full weight of the U.S. military or other forms of government directed at us violently for simply existing in our lands. We know that because we've all experienced it before. And so when traveling throughout Palestine, that was just such a major part of my experience, was just the familiarity of what all of these things that we were seeing were, as well as sort of the ways that violence is actively enacted in a one-directional fashion. Right? So there's all these guards everywhere, and I think maybe they make settlers feel safer, but they don't really serve the people whose land that they're on, if that makes sense. So yeah, we can look at examples from Standing Rock, Black Mesa, Canyon Mine, the Rio Yaqui in my father's territory, or the Berkeley Shell Mound, which is a really close example, to have a really deep understanding of what's at stake when direct ties to land are severed. This is why Indigenous people recognize the just struggle for a free Palestine, because we are actively watching these attempts to sever those connections through all the tactics that I mentioned earlier, right? The housing evictions and demolitions and other things that are so familiar, that resonate in a deeper place than perhaps is always articulable in an intellectual sense. So the final thing that I wanted to say is that in recognizing these similarities, I think a really important thing to take away is that all of us who suffer from various types of oppression, we have a right to live, and we have a right to exist and to struggle and to thrive in the place of our ancestors. Since the arrival of colonizers, there has always been resistance struggles, both in Turtle Island and in Palestine and around the globe. The technologies of occupation may have advanced in unprecedented ways in the Palestinian case, and the United States is complicit here, like it has been for over 500 years in what is now called the United States.
Thank you, Emily. Now we're going to move on to Professor Abdelhadi. She's the founder, director, and senior scholar of Arab and Muslim ethnicity and diaspora studies. She received her BA in special honors curriculum in sociology and women's studies at Hunter College, and her master's in MPhil and PhD at Yale University. Born and raised in Nablus, she has led multiple delegations to Palestine, including 2011, 2014, 2016, and 2018. That focused on teaching Palestine and has created the Edward Said Scholarship, the collaborative agreement with An-Najah National University, the first and only agreement SFSU has had with any Arab and Muslim site. Professor Abdul Hadi has just won a major victory and defeated the Lawfare Zionist Project despite their support by over 900 lawyers and the Israeli lobby. Please welcome our faculty advisor, Professor Abdul Hadi.
Professor Abdul Hadi, how has Jerusalem played an essential role in shaping the Palestinian narrative historically? In what ways is the ethnic cleansing in Palestine, and particularly Jerusalem, mirror the presence of gentrification and heavy militarization by the government entities, such as the police and ICE in the Bay Area? Since the movement of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, in what ways has the international discourse changed? And lastly, how have Palestinians within Palestine and across the diaspora responded?
Thank you. I want to first begin by thanking GOV's Journey of Palestine Students of actually organizing and continuing to organize. I cannot emphasize, hello? Yeah. I cannot emphasize how important it is to keep coming year after year, don't count this from my hands, year after year, to really celebrate and actually hear GOV stand up and say, we acknowledge that we are installing a wrong. That is really, really important, and that shows that you are continuing the legacy of people who came before us and people who will continue after us. And I'm talking about people in San Francisco State and people throughout the world. Secondly, I want to also mourn and recognize the massacres in Pittsburgh and in Kentucky. And they remind us of the massacres also of places of worship. You mentioned Hebron al-Ibrahimi Mosque, where Baruch Goldstein in 1994 went and killed 29 Muslim worshippers. And also in Jerusalem as well, because the topic is, we're talking about Jerusalem. Nobody should have the right to go and attack anybody inside houses of worship or outside the house of worship. Nobody has the right to advocate white supremacy, Zionism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, colonialism, or any kind of hatred and bigotry. We cannot compromise on these hate speeches. We cannot compromise on these hateful crimes. It's really, really, really important for us to continue renewing our standing for the indivisibility of justice, including justice for humanity. So it's really, really important for us to acknowledge. I'm going to be brief, even though I'm a professor. So I'm going to say three things that I was asked to speak about. One is, what is the place of Jerusalem in the Palestinian narrative? Second, the question of ethnic cleansing. Third is the question of legacy. Okay. So, and I want to just actually tie in the whole question of San Francisco. Jerusalem. For me, Jerusalem, and some people know this, is the older women who are sitting there selling Ka'ib Simpson and Mirabillion. Mirabillion is the sage. It's the earth of Mary, the mother of Jesus, and sitting and selling Mulukhiyya and selling Na'na. And that have been chased now by the Israeli soldiers. Jerusalem, to me, is the place where I used to always go with my family and visit. But Jerusalem is also the place, sadly, because we don't have a lot of that. It's also the place where Edward Said comes from. And he has a house in Talbiya, which is called now for the youth. The Israeli youth, there used to be a sign in front of Edward Said's house that said this is Edward Said's house. But since a lot of people used to go, they removed it. So now there is the Jewish National Fund, there is the various Zionist organizations in Talbiya. That place is gone. Jerusalem is also, as we talk about, Jerusalem is the place of Sheikh Jarrah. Sheikh Jarrah, where ethnic cleansing is taking place, where settlers are taking over Palestinian homes, and where there are families, Palestinian families, like the Qut family, and the Hamad family. We met Hamad this time, and we saw the Qut family many times before, including the Nabil Qut, and Nabil, the whole family, that their home is being taken over by the settlers. They get garbage thrown at them, they get cussed, they get attacked, they get beaten up day in and day out. And they remain put. And I think this is really the narrative of understanding of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is Shafat, where the family of Muhammad Abu Khair protested and stayed still, and now Muhammad Abu Khdeir's parents, Hussein and Suhan, for people who do not know who Muhammad Abu Khdeir is, Muhammad Abu Khdeir, on July 2014, was a young boy who was playing outside of the home, going to the mosque, was kidnapped by Zionist settlers and taken to a forest and made to drink kerosene and set on fire and burned alive. They watched him burn alive. When you think about people being massacred for who they are, when you think about Pittsburgh and Kentucky, think about what happened to Muhammad Abu Khdeir. They took him to the forest. The forest, Israeli forest now, sits on the land that used to be Deir Yassin. The Palestinian village that 70 years ago, whose residents were massacred, in order for the Zionist militants, before the creation of Israel in 1948, to clear the way for them to be able to have the road from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the place for now, the Hamad family, I mentioned that. Jerusalem is the place where in 2014, in 2011, during the indigenous feminist and women of color delegation, we stopped in the bus and we came down, and one of the people who was on the delegation was Angela Davis. And Angela Davis was coming down on the bus and she was met by a Palestinian whose name is Yaqub Oud, who had spent many years in prison and was a former prisoner. And when she came down from the bus, we went to visit 4 Palestinian legislative council members who were being expelled by Israel. And they were having a sit-in at the International Committee of the Red Cross. And we went to visit and we came down from the bus. And as Angela Davis came up from the bus, Yaqub Oud welcomed her and said, Angela, so our letter was helpful to you? Yaqub Oud was one of the Palestinian prisoners who wrote a letter to Angela Davis when she was in prison here in California. And the letter was smuggled by families across waters and seas in order to get to her. And she said, when she introduced herself the first day in Palestine, she said, one of the things that made me withstand my imprisonment for 18 months in prison was the letter I received from Palestinian prisoners. She did not realize, and I didn't realize, that one of the prisoners who actually wrote the letter was going to be receiving this. In 2014, we went with Yaqub Oud and Mahmoud Jidda, who always take us around, former prisoners, take us around in Jerusalem. They know the history of Jerusalem and architecture of occupation and architecture of resistance. They took us to Afro-Palestinian Community House, at which Ali Jadda, who is also a former prisoner, who spent the same amount of time in prison, was sitting there. And with them was another prisoner, Muhammad Oud, who is the brother of Yaqub. And all of them sat down and where they were discussing the question of what was happening to them in prison, including, I'm not going to tell the story now, we can talk about it later on here, was the story of one of the leaders of the Japanese Red Army, who the Israelis claimed he was trying to commit suicide in prison, but that actually wasn't the case. And I have a long story to discuss with you, because it belongs to the whole question of mosques and worship and how people convert to Islam, what happens in prison. Jerusalem is many things. So this is, and Jerusalem is also, and I want to talk about educational institutions. Jerusalem is home to Al-Quds University. And you know, we mentioned that we have collaboration with Al-Najah University. Al-Quds University sits cut off in its football field by the apartheid wall. You cannot go and actually exist in Al-Quds University unless you go through the apartheid wall. And at Al-Quds University, there is a big museum called the Abu Jihad Museum for Prisoners Affairs. And the museum holds the stuff that came out with the prisoners, the archives, the embroidery, the artwork, the stories of the prisoners throughout. And I'm always telling students we should really go and actually learn about it. And there is still the prisoner, that the museum also says that there is 100,000 pieces of work that belong to Palestinian prisoners that Israel still holds. Jerusalem is also the site of Ma'manillah, Mamila Cemetery, and that's connected with what Naya was speaking about. And a cemetery of Palestinians that Israel has taken over to build a museum of tolerance by the Simon Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles. Museum of Tolerance on the bones of people who've been buried. When we talk about what does it mean to be able to reclaim this cemetery, they have started dumping more and more and more waste on it in order to eliminate, because they cut off all the headstones of the families. So you don't know who's buried where. They came in the middle of the night and did it. And now they've tried to destroy the family. So there is continuous impact, day in and day out. So I'm going to move to actually the last question. Yes. And so I want to move to the last. I talked about the Jerusalem and the Palestinian narrative. I talked about ethnic cleansing. I want to talk about what does it mean to move the embassy. For Trump to move the embassy, for the Palestinians, it changes nothing. It changes nothing. Jerusalem continues to be the capital of Palestine. Jerusalem continues to be the site of worship. Jerusalem continues to be the Holy Land and will continue for the Palestinians. Whatever Trump or Netanyahu or any Zionist say, it does not change. What it changes is how would people deal with that? How do people deal with that? And I want to bring it back. I want to bring it back to San Francisco State University and to the victory that we just achieved. Because people say that you want to congratulate me, but actually, this victory is for all of us. And part of what this victory is for us, this victory for us, for me, it's victory for the Armed Studies program, it's victory for COPS, it's victory for everybody who is organizing on campus for indivisibility of justice, including justice for in Palestine. It's a victory for all of us. And the reason I say that is because if you recall, in 2016, the racist mayor of occupied Jerusalem came and visited San Francisco State. He was here in the Bay Area for a private fundraiser for APAC, the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee. And the Zionists at San Francisco State brought him to speak. And a whole bunch of students, not only Palestinian students, you can see them on the video, went and protested the presence of somebody who is claiming that Jerusalem is a place, according to him, of diversity, of creativity, and we do know that the Israeli municipality that he heads has plans to reduce the number of Palestinians in Jerusalem from 38% to 8%. And the only way you can reduce that is by ethnic cleansing. That's the only way you can do it, because nobody's moving. Nobody's moving in Sheikh Jarrah. Nobody's moving in Silwan. Nobody's moving in Beit Hanina. Nobody is moving anywhere in Jerusalem, just like the people in Khan al-Ahmar, Arab al-Jahali are staying put, and just like the people in Nabab are staying put, and just like people every single place in Palestine are staying put and refusing to be displaced, so are the people of Jerusalem. So the only way the Zionist occupation can actually reduce the number of the Palestinians is by force, by imprisonment. The Israeli prison of Muscovia, which many Palestinians know about, is a place that holds children, and that is where Palestinian children are treated different than Israeli children. Their younger age, they are prosecuted under. Okay. Okay. So that is, I talked about the children. So the last point is that this is where he came to speak, and the judgment of the court actually came out and said, just vindicated what we were saying, that the scholarship, pedagogy, and advocacy for justice in for Palestine at San Francisco State University has nothing to do with anti-Semitism, that the false charges and the frivolous lawsuit that the law firm, along with over a law firm of 900 lawyers, and the Israeli Zionist lobby behind them, could not defeat us, and it's not going to defeat us. And actually, it talked about, it affirmed what we were saying, what students are saying, what the independent investigator came out with, and what we have been saying all along. That we have the right to organize, to speak, to teach, to educate, to advocate for justice in and for Palestine as part of the indivisibility of justice. This will impact us. This will impact everything at San Francisco, not just us, everybody else who's organizing. It will impact academic freedom on all campuses around Palestine, and everybody who is fighting against white supremacy, racism, Islamophobia, homophobia, sexism, and all sorts of hatred and hate speech anywhere in any campuses. It's a big victory. We rejoice. We continue fighting, and now we hold San Francisco State accountable. And tell them, fund the Ahmed Studies program. Give us our faculty lines. Allow us to be able to exist. Stop harassing us. Speak up for justice. The courts have